Welcome to Promote, Profit, Publish. I'm your host, Juliette Clark. Wow, we have a full house today. I'm really excited. This is our monthly training that we usually have. So for those of you who want to actually go watch this on YouTube, I encourage you to go over there. I think Alex is probably, I don't know if he's going to share slides, but are you, Alex? Yeah, he's going to share slides. So if you want to actually see what's going on, I encourage you to go over to Super Brand Publishing over on YouTube, and you'll be able to watch the training and follow through. So super excited to have you guys here today because we all need to go out there. We all need to be promoting, and it's hard. You have a couple different ways you can go with podcasting if you want to be a guest. You can either send out your sheets yourself, your podcast speaker sheets, which you're probably going to get a lot of no's because people don't know you. If you're like me, you choose your guests from people you know you've met. Or you can hire someone, and I have to be the first to tell you when people hire and they reach out to me to be on my show, I tell them no, because most of them haven't listened to the show. They don't know what it's about. So I'm excited that Alex is bringing his new PodMatch dating app, which is pretty much what it reminds me of, to our community. So let me introduce Alex. Alex Sanfilippo is the host of the top-rated podcast called Podcasting Made Simple. He's also the founder of podpros.com, a software company focused specifically on the podcasting industry. Alex and his team have created popular services like PodMatch, a service that matches podcast guests and hosts together for interviews, and Podcast SOP, a project management tool that helps podcasters keep up with their episode releases. So welcome, Alex.
Julia, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be here and to see so many familiar faces in the group. So hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Just really thrilled to be here. I know last time, by the way, Julia and I recorded once together, and I might be getting the date wrong at this point because it's been a while, but I think it was 12/29/2022. And I encourage everyone to go back. I'm going to find the link to that, and I'll put it in the chat at some point. But you can go find me on Juliet's website, and that was a great conversation we had. So, Juliet, thank you again for having me. It's an honor to be back with you.
Well, thank you. And I'm excited because we're sending so many people over to use your site because they don't know how to get podcasters or, podcast interviews. And I love that you're sharing the best practices. I know you have the videos that are on the site, but a lot of times people would rather show up and ask you questions instead of going through videos on their own. So I'm excited that we're going to get some best practices, and I'm going to probably learn something here because I'm probably the worst user on the planet.
I don't know. That might actually be me if you ask my team. So maybe you're a close second. I don't know. Yeah, I'm excited to share this. And just for anyone who's listening, not watching, I'll do my best to make it work well for people on the audio side as well, to try not to single them out or anything like that. But yeah, I may do some sharing if that helps and stuff like that. Open to questions, open to giving an overview, and I'm just going to kind of follow your lead, Julia. But thank you for being such a great supporter of PodMatch. Like, we always see people come through from you. And what I really like is when it's a member of this group, they're super high quality. So it's like, yeah, someone from Juliet, like it's not like, oh no, here comes somebody that might be a little terrifying to work with, right? That's not the case with you. So thank you again for just the tribe and community that you keep around you. It's very impressive.
Oh, you're welcome. And you know what? These guys are really trying. They've gone to all the trouble of writing a book, which is so much work. And then, like Tracy and Christine know they're currently publishing. I put them through hell to publish. And by the time their book comes out, they're like, oh my God, I don't even want to talk about it anymore. I don't want to interview. I want to just go, move ahead.
That's funny. I see people kind of nodding, but also crying a little bit in the room here. So yeah, I think people are, I see they're scared to unmute or anything like that. They're like, oh no, I'm not going to say anything, but Julia, it's great. Right?
Yeah. And so go ahead and start it. Show us what you got.
Sure. Yeah. Again, honored to be here. So, and if people have questions on the way, Juliet, is it okay if we do that during or before, because it is being recorded? Is it better to do it at the end? What's the format that you like to do here?
Why don't we wait until the end if that's okay? Is that okay with everybody? Can I get thumbs up? I know there's a little button, but I don't know how to use it. So just give me a thumbs up.
That's great. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to start by saying this, promote, profit, publish, right? This is on the promote side of it. So the other things I'm going to leave to people more qualified than me, like Juliet, to talk about those. But this is on the promote side of it, which is a big part of having a book, right? Is actually getting it out there. And the tactic that I like to talk about is podcast guesting, or of course, being a host as well. I think that both have some very big benefits. So I'm excited to dive into the guesting side today. But just know, I'm also a big proponent of starting a podcast. And I'll share some data before I get into anything on both sides of the mic. So being a podcast host, the reason I think that that's such a great thing in today's world is because as we're recording this, the number of active podcasts it's the lowest it's been since 2020. There was a few months in 2020 where it spiked up really high and then immediately dropped down. I mean, almost everyone who started, I'll just call it a COVID podcast, stopped very quick because they're like, oh, this is a lot more work and I'd rather just sit down and watch TV with my free time than try to be a podcaster. So it's a lot of work, and that's why a lot of people don't make it. But I'm telling you, if you can, the opportunity is really ripe. And the reason I say that is because although being an active podcaster is at an all-time low right now, I'll just call it that, it has not, let's put it this way, it hasn't grown since July 2020 was the last time we had any growth from an active podcast standpoint. People start and they stop as soon as they start. But here's why there's a big benefit there and a big opportunity. It's because listenership is climbing at the fastest rate it ever has and continues to do that. Like, it really was set in motion in 2020 and it just continues to climb at an exponential rate. So if you're one of the few people podcasting, you are standing out as an authority. It's a lot of work. It's a labor of love. Juliet can talk about that a little bit if you all ever want to get into that side of it. But I just wanted to share that I think it's always right now is a great time, maybe possibly the best time we've seen to start a podcast. With that said, being a guest, it's always a good opportunity. But I do want to give this caveat to that. It's getting really hard to be a guest on podcast, which sounds weird because tools like PodMatch exist, which make it easy. But here's why. Because the active podcasts are not climbing, so they're always staying the same, but listenership is climbing. People that want to be in podcasting but not be a podcaster, does that make sense? They want to be a guest, right? Because they see the power in it. That number is climbing extremely fast. So latest data shows, and I'm not going to get into the companies that do all this, but you can go look at Edison Research. They're one of the big ones. I'm not going to get too technical here because I think it would maybe make us all fall asleep, or at least me. So I'm going to skip that. But what we're seeing is there's about 12 million people actively looking to be a guest on podcasts right now. If you go back to 2019, with even my podcast, and I had my podcast capped at one point at the 198th most popular most popular podcast in the world. So it was a good show. I did my time. I was a good interviewer. In 2019, I could not convince people to be a guest. I mean, I had to plead, and people were like, "Are you going to pay me?" They're like, "Why the heck would I waste my time being a guest on a podcast?" Like, those were the answers I got. And again, I had a lot of authority in the space, one of the biggest podcasts, doing really well across the board. Like, and I'm saying that as humbly as I can, just to prove the point. In 2019, people were like, "This is stupid. Why would I waste my time?" Now today, there are 10 people that have the exact same qualifications, the exact same everything, like are perfect guests that are knocking on every host door being like, "Please, please, please let me be a guest. I'll do anything. Let me be a guest." And so I always tell people, with 12 million people looking to be a guest and only just under 400,000 active podcasts, and we're seeing the guest, I imagine by next year be 20 million people trying to be guests on podcasts. That's just my guess, because there is so much power in being a guest on podcasts. But because of that, the problem comes into play, and that is that podcast hosts have a lot of options. And what I mean by that is, like, so for me, I used to have a 97% success rate when I was pitching to be a guest on a podcast. So 97% of hosts said yes to me being a guest. Now it's under 60%. Haven't changed the way I do it. I still think I have a really good pitch, and I'll get into that today because I think it's valuable. But it's just because there are 10 people more qualified than me that can talk about exactly what I can talk about that are also pitching that podcast at the same time. So it's like, who are you going to pick? Alex, who's 10 people below the person who's most qualified, or Alex, right? So it's getting much more difficult to be a guest. And that, again, is the power of actually having a podcast, is because then you're the one that everyone's after, right? And you can say, "Hey, read my book if you want to be on my podcast. Let me know what you liked about it, and then we can talk again." You can do stuff like that, and that actually will work. And not people are like, "Oh man, this is the only podcast that will have me, so yes, I need to," right? At the same time, it's not overly saturated. You can still do it. We just have to focus more on the niche that we're in. So as authors, what is your book about? What is it that you're focused on? Stay in that lane. An example, don't go on a dog walking podcast just because you have a dog if your book is about self-development, right? Like you can't, it's hard to bridge that gap and make that argument, right? Leave it up to the professional dog walkers who want to be on that podcast now. Because again, there's probably 100 of them trying to be on that show because that show might not even exist yet. But unless your book is about that, then of course that is the right show for you. But in general, you want to stay in your lane. You want to stay in the niche that you have. The more aligned it is, the easier it is for the host to be able to say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. This is going to be a good fit for me. So again, really important that you make sure that you're staying in your lane. That's the first thing I'll say is really figuring out what that is, who you can serve really well. And then right past that is making sure that you have a really good pitch. And then we'll kind of get into the actual PodMatch side of things, but having a good pitch is so important. And so I'm going to kind of blow through this real quick, but I'll have a resource. Actually, Julie, that's what we talked about last time I was on the podcast, I believe, is we talked
about pitching.
Yeah, I think we actually talked about that. Yeah, and I dropped the link in the chat and you can put it in the show notes and stuff like that. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into it, but what I'm going to say is do something different. Podcast hosts are used to saying, hey, host, not even putting in their name. Like at least listen to the first 10 seconds to find out their name. They're probably going to say it. Not, hey, host, loved your podcast. The latest episode was really good. It's like, you didn't say anything. You said, host, podcast, latest episode. That is not like unique to anybody, right? So the first thing you want to do is make it different. Hey, Juliet, I've been listening to your podcast. I really enjoyed your latest episode about this, where you talk to these two people about subscription boxes for authors, which is actually what one of your latest episodes was out that I listened to, right? So like already you're like, okay, this person actually knows what they're talking about, right? I pitched to be on a podcast yesterday. It's one that I'd really like to be on. They don't usually do guests, but I actually there's 3 hosts, and I put a quote from one of the hosts that they said 3 years ago in the podcast, and how that topic hasn't come up since then because I listened to the podcast. I'm not telling you to go listen to 3 years of the podcast, right? But if you're already listening, you can do something like that. I know her mind is blown because I guarantee you no one else has ever done anything like that. And again, I'm not like tooting my own horn. I'm just saying, like, you got to do something different. I put a quote in there and said, hey, you haven't brought this up since then, but I think it's really valuable. And here's how we can continue that conversation. Julia, yes.
Yeah, Alex, that is such a good point, because when I was talking about the PR people, I always hit the reply button back. That's if I'm a little bit interested. Otherwise, I just ignore. And I'll ask, like, how many episodes have you listened to? Or your client? And it's always 0. They always go away. But I do want to ask you about one thing I want to bring up, because I know, not on this call, but a couple people have come to me lately and they've said, I connected with a podcast host and they said, yes, I'd love to have you. It's $500 to be on the show. We should all avoid those. Those are people trying to get you to cover their production costs. And that's really not a real thing. I mean, I can't imagine anybody that I would pay for, other than Joe Rogan, which I don't have the money to pay for, to be on something like that. You should never pay to be on a podcast.
I'm in agreement with that. And that's actually, it's funny. This came up just 30 minutes before getting on this call today. Alicia, my wife, who's also one of the co-founders, basically ran into somebody who's like, hey, I'm charging my guests, but I'm not being able to get guests anymore. I'm like, well, let me tell you why, right? But the thing is, hosts are getting desperate. It's hard to monetize a podcast. And so they've got this crazy, it's supply and demand. They got 100 people asking me to be a guest every week. So they're like, well, if one of them will pay me, I'll do it. But I actually did an article with Business Insider a couple of years ago about how that actually turns into paid media. And if you're not disclosing that your guest paid, that could be a problem. Let's put it that way, because it's like if you watch an infomercial, it starts off by saying, this is a paid advertisement by XYZ company. So if I pay Juliet to be here today, she should technically disclose that this is an advertisement for what I do. And I don't know, like, that blurs the line of journalists can go after that. That's not really my lane. But I'm just saying, I think that there might be some conflict of interest, because then you're not really having a guest that benefits your listenership. You're thinking, I'll take the guest that pays, which I think really runs into a problem. And again, I'm like a big proponent of not doing this. I think that it's what could become wrong with the industry, because eventually, let's imagine every host saying, I'm going to charge, every host saying that. And then they just keep on raising the rates. Eventually, the only people that can pay for it are big production companies that have a really fixed set agenda that they want to cover, right? So they're like, this is what I'm here for. This is what I'm going to do. And then the independent individuals who just maybe have a book, right? They're not necessarily able to just be like, yeah, I want to be that guest. Like, well, sorry, Disney's paying me 10 grand for that same spot. What are you going to do? Be like, I don't have it, right? So we lose the independent voices, which is actually, I think, the real power and authority in podcasting. I'm really with Juliet. Don't pay to be a guest on a podcast. Now, if a host says, hey, free to be on the show, right? Like, let's get you on here. That's cool. That's great. If they say, would you like to run advertisements afterwards with me? If we each put $500 in, or you put this money, we can get it out there to more people. That would be a different thing that I would personally be okay with. I've done it a few times, but it wasn't me paying to be there. It's saying, hey, this was a good episode that was determined after the episode. I think there's value in us actually promoting this together. So, Julie, I'm glad you brought that up. That's definitely one thing you should avoid. The other thing you should avoid is just the podcast host is like, I just need guests. I mean, again, if it's perfectly aligned, go for it, but that's usually a red flag. They're like, I just have to have a guest because I don't have an episode tomorrow. That usually means you might be the last guest, because next week when they can't make it work or they're sick, then their show goes on hiatus and then people very rarely come back. Let's put it that way. So a couple things to look for: people charging, people who are like, I have to have a guest, right? Those are two extremes, but be careful for those. Anyway, getting into more of like the practical stuff. It's like, okay, how do you be a guest on a podcast? Again, I kind of shared some of the data, shared making sure that your pitch is really unique. You can go back to that last episode that Juliet and I did together. I dropped it in the chat, and I'm sure it'll be linked in the show notes and stuff as well. But now, how do you actually do it, right? A lot of people these days are using social media. That's still the biggest. Like, the data will show you that people are actually doing DMs on social media, which can work if you have a relationship with somebody. If you don't, that makes it really difficult to start to build that, because there's gonna be so many questions back and forth. And also, you don't know for certain that host is looking for, that they're actually looking for guests. Maybe they have a backlog of a year, right? Or maybe this is their last season where they're having guests. Like, you don't know that by just reaching out that way. And that's why I really enjoy, and I'll mention my own product here, that's why I enjoy PodMatch. And there's other directory type services like that. So by all means, do your due diligence, go check some of them out, see how they work for you. I'm only going to mention the name of mine right now, but you can do a simple Google search and find some others. I encourage you to do that. Check them out and see which one works best for you, because I don't think there's anything that's going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. But the reason I like those services is because podcast hosts have taken initiative to join those services saying, yes, I am looking for guests. That, to me, is where you want to be. You don't want to be somewhere where you're guessing, right? Where you're like, well, I wonder if they want guests, right? Like, I'm not sure if they are really interested in having any guests, but I'm going to try reaching out. I'd rather go somewhere where a host has said, yep, I'm looking for guests. Can you send them my way? And so I think that right there, to me, is like, that's the first thing that I want to mention. You're going to have way better success rates by going somewhere where people have confirmed, yes, I'm looking for guests. So use one of the directory type services or matching type services, whatever it is that you want to call it. So I'll dive into mine a little bit here, Juliet, and this is where I could even share some screen to show what that looks like, give people an idea of it.
Hold on, I don't think I have you on screen share.
That would be that's going to be helpful for sure.
There you go.
Cool, thank you. So the idea behind these services, behind what we do, is we decided to make it a little bit simpler. Just do the actual matching, right? Like, actually help podcast hosts and guests be able to find each other even faster. I like to make podcasting on either side of the mic as frictionless as possible, because at the end of the day, if you're the podcast host, your podcast isn't your listeners don't care. I'm just going to go straight to it. All right. I'm just going to be really blunt here. Your listeners do not care how long it took you to produce the episode, to find the guests, to do all the administrative work. You can even tell them, this took me 15 hours to do. They're like, big deal. I don't care. Where's the episode at? Right. And this is me being blunt. And on the guest side, same thing. If you spent 3 weeks trying to find podcasts to be on, nobody is going to be impacted by that 3 weeks, right? Can we make this frictionless? Can we make it fast? Can we make the connection as quickly as possible? And that has been our goal with PodMatch, and always will be. We're always expanding to find ways just to simplify the process. So for us, the way we look at it is, can we show people if it's a good fit or not really quick? And so that's what I'm going to show you all here. And I missed one thing that I think is really important, by the way, going back to like the podcast you should and shouldn't be on type of thing, doing the pitch, always be willing to do the outreach. Again, hosts have a lot of options these days, it seems, but anything in life, you get out of it what you put into it. So if you create an account on PodMatch or one of the other places that are similar, if you just set it and forget it, I don't think you're ever going to get any traction. I think it's going to require you saying, okay, I'm going to proactively now put time into it, do the outreach to hosts. Like anything in life, we get out of it, we put into it. And I'm a firm believer of that. So I encourage you, don't just like set it and be like, cool, I'll wait for the floodgates to open for me, right? No, go out there and continue doing the work every single day. And I don't mean to reach out to 100 podcasts a day. As a matter of fact, I reach out to 1 or 2 a week. And my goal is to get on 1 podcast a month. So I don't have big, ambitious goals to be on tons of them. As a matter of fact, I find that you can turn 1 podcast interview to a lot of content. I have a buddy who does 1 a month, and he turns into the entire month of content is done by that 1 podcast interview. Crushes it, does a really good job with it, figured out like the formula for it. I can share that. He actually recorded how he does that, and I can share that with everybody in a little bit here. But I'm going to show you all PodMatch now. Thank you for letting me share my screen here. And just a thumbs up. Can you all see this? Do you all see what I see here? Okay. One time I was giving a presentation like this, and I wasn't properly sharing the screen, and it was 5 minutes before someone's like, "Are you sharing a screen right now? Because we can't see it." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, 5 minutes? You all are too nice. So if you all can't see something, it looks like I'm explaining, just tell me. But I'm not going to go into everything here, but this is the dashboard of PodMatch. And basically you have a to-do list. So the to-do list is important because it's basically telling you, hey, here's the action needs to happen. So you can tell there's one where I'm having Angie on my podcast, but we've not scheduled a date and time yet. So just clicking that will enable us to schedule the date and time that will align on both of our calendars, which is, I think, really great. Let's see. Same thing. This is me being a guest on a podcast. This is me hosting and me being a guest. I have like a hybrid account. So I have both guest and host. So mine's a little bit different here. But this one is me being a guest on a podcast. Same thing. We've determined we want to make it happen. We've determined topic at this point. We've not actually scheduled the date and time yet. We're trying to align our calendars, right? And there are scheduling links. So most people will make that easy. Me, Next in Time, and me, I can tell you all, we have very different schedules. Let's put it this way. I think we're like 10 hours different time zones. So making that work has required us to not use an automated calendar. Instead, we are actually chatting back and forth to see who's willing to wake up earlier or stay up later. So that's kind of where we're at with it. Beyond that, you can pin people if you maybe want to look at it later. Upcoming interviews, you have your schedule, which is also on the dashboard, and then estimated episode releases, which I really like because as the guest, like all these are shows I was a guest on. I can see when they're coming out. So like this one came out yesterday. So I haven't seen that came out yesterday. So now I can go back and press a button here that will let me message this host and say, hey, I noticed you said the episode's released. Can you send me a link to it? I want to be able to share it, right? And then I can just get an idea of, okay, when are my episodes coming out as a guest on or that I'm hosting? Same thing. It'll kind of mix together or just start with the word guest or host. And again, here are my upcoming interviews, all that type of stuff. So that's basically the dashboard. I won't get into the rest of this. I mean, you can see where I can see my potential reach. So both from a listener perspective and from a social impressions that have been made based on posts that have included me from hosts that use PodMatch, which kind of a cool thing to be able to see. And then I can see I have 92 reviews as a guest, which is really cool because I don't know of another place that gets you reviews as a guest, which is really great for a host to be able to see. Because right now it's just kind of a shot in the dark as a host, right? Their hosts are just kind of like, so are you going to be a good guest? They can actually see that 92 people that have had me on their podcast say Alex has done a good or decent job, right? So I've got 2 unscheduled interviews, 3 upcoming. I've completed 216 through the platform. The unpaid commission, we do have an affiliate program. Don't look at mine because I have never paid it out since day one, but I actively use it to make sure it works. So you can talk to my co-founders to see if they want to give me $38,000 and change right now, right? So this is not typical results, but since day one, I've just followed the same plan of bringing people to the platform like we tell anyone else. Just so you know, like an extreme commission beyond this one, which has never been paid out, is we have people who make $700 to $800 a month using PodMatch because we just do a profit share type of thing. So I'm not going to get to that. It's beside the point. Now to show you the actual matches. So again, being a hybrid member, so guest and a host. So I want to see podcast guests. So now if I hit this matches button, I have 6 right now. I can click here and it will show me my next available match. So here's someone named Ryan. I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but I'm able now to see, this is like one of the beauties of PodMatch. It'll set up this media one sheet for you. It's a digital version of one, so it's not like a PDF, which those are great and all. And you can just copy paste that information, but it's so nice having an actual media one sheet. And because when people are like, hey, I want to be on you to be on my podcast and it's off of PodMatch, I just send them straight to this page of mine where they can see these all this information. Information. That's the right way to say it. Words can be difficult, right? The guest details is the only thing that's proprietary to the platform. So you can even share this with people who are not on PodMatch. They just won't see this bar where they can actually take action, which is message, maybe later, pass, previously interviewed, or pin for you to look at them later. And they won't see all these details because those are inside of the platform. And I'll dive in that in a minute. But again, having a media one sheet's great because you get the opportunity of your about, no one likes to read. I don't know about you all, but for some reason, I know we're all authors here, but people, when they're looking at stuff like that, they don't necessarily want to read all this until they can quantify that it's for them. So we added tags so you can quickly look at it to see, okay, yeah, I'll read more about this guy, right? Before we had that, people were like, oh, it's too much to read. I'm like, what? You said you're an author. What do you mean it's too much to read? Right? So they can go through the tags and quickly determine. You can have your approved images. So the hosts really enjoy having multiple images, right? And then their bio, what you want hosts to usually read. This one's a little long, right? I wouldn't read this necessarily. Actually, I'll jump over to mine real quick. This is my public version of it. So this is what anyone else would see minus the little edit buttons, right? But this is actually my profile. So again, I got my tags, but you see I have multiple images. Catnip for podcasters, by the way, is having an image that has space on either side of it so they can add words. That's totally catnip for a podcast. That's because like I could put the name of the podcast episode on there now, right? And not have to do it over Alex's face. So that's a benefit. But again, here's my bio that I like to have read, and it's short. And then my call to action, like where I like people to go. I've got ideas for episode titles, like, or the main focus of it that I'm able to cover, questions that I'm always ready to answer. And for the most part, hosts are not going to read these questions word for word or use these titles. But what it does is gives them a framework for where you want the conversation to go. And I think that that's the beautiful thing. So they're not going to just Google you and realize, oh, I used a pet example earlier. I'll use another pet example. Oh, this person used to be a dog breeder. I'll talk to them about that. When you're like, oh man, my book is about personal development. Why are we talking about dogs for 35 minutes on this episode, right? By having this information handy, you give them a direction to go. So again, and then I have my some previous interviews I've done, some different shows I've been on, which I should probably update. Some of these they've been out for a while. So Entrepreneurs on Fire. And I had the opportunity to interview with Jasmine Starr. That's one I need to put on there. That was a great conversation. Anyway, podcast, like my actual reviews from hosts. So these are hosts that have had me on the show, and they're just talking about it, which is great. So again, that's my profile. But going back to this other one, which was a match that I had. So just looking at it, I'm not going to decide this in real time, but again, I can take any of these actions. So for now, I'm going to hit maybe later because I want this person to come back up. But just to show you all an example, here's the next one. So I actually know Barcy, which I can tell you now, this is a great match because she has a lot of expertise in podcasting. So this one I'm not going to do anything now because I would hit message and then we'd start the conversation. So if I hit message, it'll open it up and start the conversation here. I will show you all the actual messages itself. And that's kind of the last thing I'll show. Explore just lets you go on. If you're like looking for something really specific, you can come on here and you can just type in whatever it is that you're looking for and get really specific on here. And it'll just kind of go through the whole database of members and you can message them from there as well. But my actual message side of things, let me look at my guest view. So these are podcasts that I'm actively chatting with to be a guest on their podcast. And if I jump in like school, wow, I'll be real. This is like a bucket list one for me. That'd be really cool to be on this podcast. I don't know if he really wants me to be on. This doesn't look like an actual invitation, but I'm going to go ahead and start the conversation. Let's put it that way at least. But from here, I can now join the conversation. I can hit confirm, match, or pass. Whoever receives the initial message is the one that takes the action of confirming or passing. And then from there, let me see if I can find one. I was just on this podcast. So everything's finished. We scheduled the date. We actually confirmed that it had been interviewed. And now I'm just waiting on her to actually set the estimated release date. But we can keep the conversation going from here. Anyway, here's another one I can confirm match, right? So like you have this entire match status, and that the whole thing is just simplifying the process. And we're actually about to roll out a new version of this. Will make it even faster on that side of things. And again, the whole idea is can we make it frictionless? So I'll stop sharing my screen now. That's really how the whole thing works there. And Julia, do you want to ask a question there?
I do. Well, I want to make a comment. So you guys saw the podcast review section. Just like if you're one of my clients, I probably told you a ton of times that when you work with someone on LinkedIn, ask for a review because then on your marketing materials, you can cut and paste the reviews in. Same with this. You can put the reviews, you can just cut and paste them right off here onto your media page so people can see when they're looking at the media page on your site that you're a good guest. So it's kind of puts it all in one place. And when you're putting your marketing materials together, you don't have to run around and look for things. You can just log in and grab them from here.
Yeah. The last thing I should show actually would be let me pull this back up, is actually this would probably, I should have done this first. This would be helpful. What does an actual host profile look like? So I'll do that real quick as well. Let me pull one up real quick though. And so this is like, if you're going to pitch, this is what you would end up seeing. So let me just go over to, I'm going to click on any random one here. Any random one that, let's see, maybe that's appropriate. Some of these look a little intense. Let's put it that way. Okay, here we go. I know Kelly, so I'll show hers. Aligned Success. She's a great podcaster and she's an expert podcast guest too. This is who I go to learn about podcast guesting, by the way. So here I am. I've not been on this show. So I just happened to search for it. So the only thing it doesn't say is pass. It has maybe later, because it's not in a match. So it hasn't shown up as a match at this point. But again, you have this little bit of detail here, which is really nice. So I can see that she has 210 reviews as a podcast host, which I'll be real, if someone has more than 10 reviews, that's huge. I mean, getting reviews on, these are Apple reviews specifically, getting an Apple review on a podcast is extremely difficult. It's a great indicator that someone actually listens to it. So if a host even has, 5 even, if someone has reviews, it's like, okay, clearly someone has listened to this podcast. The other thing that's really, that I like to look at, and by the way, I purposely changed a few numbers, a few things on here, because I wanted you all to see the check and the X on this detail section here. So again, I can kind of look through it all. I can see the ideal guest. They explain who it is that they're looking for, what I need to know about the podcast, the flow of it, who they're talking to, the audience, and some different links and stuff like that. All really important stuff. But the real power is in this check or X. So again, I changed some random things just to show you all, because this was an easy one. I purposely said I'd only accept like other genders versus male and female. So you all can see, okay, there's an X. So based off my criteria, I wouldn't actually be able to match with this person, because I said no ladies, right? I also said no men. I said nobody. So just to show you all what the X looks like. And then I said social media. I put like 1 billion social followers. So an X would be on everything, right? All things I did just to show you all what this looks like. But again, if I was like evaluating this podcast, 210 reviews, that's kind of all I would even look at, because that's huge. But I can also see really good engagement on social media, because we actually added an engagement score, which just means our system goes through and calculates who's actually engaging, because I realize now a lot of people buy social followers. And Juliet, you had a recent episode where you're talking to a guest about how they weren't accepted to be on some radio show because they didn't have enough social media followers, which if they had a big budget, they could just go buy them. So we look at engagement scores. So here's an example. There was somebody last week who had like 500,000 social media followers across all their platforms with less than 1% engagement, which to me means they paid for those. Let's put it that way. The other thing I can see is that the downloads per episode is about 3,000. And this is an estimate. It's not going to give us ever exact numbers, but I can see that they're on charts as well. So in the United Kingdom, it's the 200 under business. It's the 221st most popular podcast right way. And then in Norway, 180th place. So you can see if they're on charts. 99 episodes. To me, knowing that most podcasters never even make it to 50, that's a good thing. We speak the same language. That's really good, right? And then anyway, these are all the things. I'm not going to dive into all of them. Basically, I know that, okay, this is a podcast I might want to be on. So as a guest, you're able to see this. And again, you start the message out. But now you're able to see it. You can click here to listen to it. You can kind of see where everything's at. So just wanted to show you the host side of it. And again, both of these are public and private. So you can see them just on the web. So you can share it with people, or you can go to it without being on PodMatch. But if you're logged in, you can actually see that detail section, which will really dive deep into some stuff. So that's all I've got to share there. Juliet, I'll turn it back over to you. And if there's more, I can dive in.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Anybody have questions? I know a couple people on here are using this. So, if you're running into problems or don't understand something, this might be the time to ask, and you can show you on a screen on it. And I know like Christine just got on it. Can I call Christine out, or is she going to be upset? Oh, Linda's raising her hand. Linda's
raising her hand like the proper way, right?
Yes.
Look at that, like the Zoom way.
And then Lana, and then Nancy.
Okay.
Are you suggesting that we should ask our hosts, who are our hosts for podcasts, to give us a review?
PodMatch will automatically do that. So the system will ask on your behalf. Again, try to make it frictionless. There will be no reason for you to ask, because as soon as you do an interview together, the first thing it's going to say to the host is, hey, how was this guest? Can you write them a quick review and leave them a star rating? And we'll put it on their profile. And we've been putting more emphasis on this. So I'd say now about 75% of hosts do that. But yeah, so they'll actually leave it, so you don't need to ask. But if you've been on a podcast that wasn't through PodMatch, yeah, I suggest asking them for a review. I mean, how did I do? Can you tell me about what I shared? And a podcast is a meaningful experience. So people usually have, if you did a good job, which I'm sure you did, people have something nice to say usually.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Michelle has a question here. I've heard that it's a robust process to sign up for PodMatch. Can you please share more about the process and how long it takes to set up an account? Alex, I think it's pretty easy. I'll let you take it after I say, I thought it was easy, but I had a speaker sheet already. So Alex, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. Michelle, I love this question because I'll be real. Out of any comparable service to PodMatch, ours is definitely the most time consuming to sign up because I showed you the profiles. That information is all required before you get on the platform. Most will just let you on and then you can fill it out later. We did not want to do that because our devotion is to quality, not quantity. And so we've been really focused on that. But if you have a speaker sheet, like Juliet, I've been told it takes like 5 minutes to sign up because you're just literally copy pasting everything. If you've never done that practice though, it's a really good practice to figure out where you want to be. I've had some people tell me, hey, it took me an hour to sign up. They're like, but now I actually am more honed in than I've ever been. So it'll actually help you be able to narrow things in, get it figured out. And so, yes, it can be a little bit of time, but if you have that information ready, you already know what you want to talk about, what you want to do, it's not really that bad. But either way, I consider it a good practice. So,
Hey, Alana, you can unmute and let's have you.
Thank you. My question is that I have seen on some high profile people's YouTube channel that the guest requires payment. So, if you want me to be on your show or your podcast, it's X amount. So my question is about the ethics of that, the other way around, charging yourself, to be a guest.
right. Yeah. I know this is an important topic, Lana, because we're seeing this more and more. I know we talked about this a little bit earlier. So I'll go into, again, I think it turns into an advertisement at that point. Are you having the guest because they're the right guest, or are you having the guest because they paid you? Example, there was somebody who's a writer for Forbes reached out to me recently, hey, we want to feature the best software founders of 2023, and you got nominated for it. I was like, oh, how cool. I'm like, that's amazing. I'm honored. What do you need from me? They're like, we need a payment of $1,500 and then we can put you on the list. And I was like, I just asked, I'm like, I did a video because I wanted to be authentic. I'm like, hey, listen, again, honored to be considered. Real quick, am I considered because I pay you $1,500 or because I actually somehow qualify for this? And they said both. And I was like, listen, I'm not going to pay to be something I'm not. I'm like, I'm not against paying for things. If you told me that was to get it approved or something, right? If they would have verbalized a little different, I maybe would have done it, but I don't want to be the best of the best because I paid to be the best on the best, right? Air quotes there on all that. So yeah, I think that we have to be really careful in paying for things. I personally completely avoid it because I question whether at some point someone's going to cut in and say, hey, listen, if you've paid to be a guest on a podcast, that is considered an advertisement. It's not going to be shared the same way. I don't know how that would happen necessarily, but I do worry about that. And I get it. Podcast hosts, YouTube people, they're trying to find ways to monetize because they do have some cost. I just don't think that that's the right way to do it. So again, I avoid it.
Yeah. Here, I really want to, really quickly too, Lana, we have seen some recent publicity about big companies out there who took on things that didn't appeal to their ideal audience. So I would caution you in that sense too, because not only will you lose listeners, for someone like me, my podcast is a gateway to business. So I don't want to offend my audience. I don't want to produce something that they're not going to be interested in just because I'm making money, because that doesn't help my overall business plan, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think there was some confusion maybe because I'm talking about the host paying the guest.
Oh,
Yeah.
I still come into the same thing. I think the same ethics apply. I think on either side. Here's the thing: if there's dollars involved in this process, you take a potential connection and turn it into a transaction. It's probably the best way it can be said. You're saying, okay, hey, Lana, I'd love to connect with you, but give me money first, or I'll give you money first. And it's like, okay, that's now a transaction versus what could become an opportunity to actually build a connection with that person. Because here's the thing, Julia and I recorded nearly a year ago, probably. But we've stayed connected because there was no transaction involved. It was a connection we made. We realized we have good synergy. We can serve each other's audiences. So here we are, right? But if I would have been like, cool, Juliet, pay me $500. Now in Juliet's mind, even if she's like, well, he's the perfect guest, I'll do it. It's a transaction. Like that would have been it. I wouldn't be here today. Let's put it that way. So I think it applies the same way on both sides. I get that there's big personalities in the world that like, I guess they have to charge for their time. Great example, Tim Tebow lives down the street from me. He's a great guy. So his time, I guess, is valuable. I know if you're offering him less than $80,000 for something for 30 minutes, his team won't even open the email. They just immediately move it to trash. So if you're not offering 6 figures or more for 30 minutes of his time, they're not even going to consider it. And I guess at some point, maybe you hit that level where that makes sense. But in general, I think you lose authenticity when that happens.
Yeah. Thank you. I like the idea that the relationship changes.
Yes.
And it becomes a purchase rather than a connection.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Nancy? Nancy.
Hi.
Hi, Nancy.
Hello. My question is around equipment. So I see I got a nice microphone because more and more, some of the top podcasters have actually been speaking about the fact that they had to turn potential guests away because they just, the quality isn't good enough. And if I am going to be start my own podcast, I'm just kind of curious about the equipment, and perhaps that could be in addition to PodMatch, which is like, we vetted this person based on, that they have a good microphone, they have a good camera, they have good streaming. So that's my questions kind of around that. What are some of your recommendations? And
well, Nancy, first thing I'll share is I think it's important to start where we are with what we have. Here's the thing I've learned about podcasting is that you'll be forgiven for the lack of sound and video quality, but you won't be forgiven for the lack of content quality. So I've listened to some interviews that were like someone was driving in a car while they were getting interviewed, but the content was so rich and so good that I was like, that's okay. I'm gonna press through this because I'm learning so much. I'm gaining so much from this. At the same time, I've heard some of the best podcast gear people in the world. Like everything was flawless, absolutely perfect quality, but the content itself was like really severely lacking. I'll tell you which show I stopped listening to, which one I continue listening to. So I'm not saying don't try, but if you have a good message that the world needs, people are going to power through a little bit of sound issue or stuff like that to be able to actually get the information they need versus super polished and all that. I'll use the example here. Once I went and played pool with a buddy. First time playing pool with him, he showed up with his own gear. He has his own stick, own chalk, gloves, everything. I was like, oh man, I'm going to get crushed. I'm like, this guy must be so good. He was awful. So terrible. And I showed up like wearing t-shirt and shorts and he's like in like all proper gear. But I thought he was going to be good because he had all the right stuff. But again, what really matters is the skill once you're actually there. Now, with that said, I do always believe in continuous improvement. If it's something you love, let's imagine you're 5 interviews in as a guest or host, and you're like, I really enjoy this. Start making an investment. And it really doesn't take as much as you'd think. Some people like, there's people, especially YouTubers, they're like, hey, my home podcast studio is $50,000. Like, this is how I've been able to make it. Everything you see here that I'm using, this is a great piece of photo paper behind me with 2 LED lights that actually hit against it. And I roll that up when I'm not using it. It's like on a track. And behind it is my whiteboards. This mic is a premium mic. It was like $200, I think. I'm using a webcam. Everything just plugs into a laptop that's right in front of me. I actually did a full walkthrough of it. I'll drop a link to that. It's podpros.com/setup. And it has a full walkthrough video and all my gear breakdown. So podpros.com/setup. I'm not saying to get my gear, but if you focus on continuous improvement, you can just add little things as it goes along. You can get a good mic for $100, some of them less than that. You can upgrade to a webcam. Like I think this one is now like $100 webcam, right? Like I'm not saying get it from day one, but work your way up to it because I do think that goes a long way.
Yeah. And you guys, I don't use a background now, but when I first started, I literally went down to the dollar store and bought a trifold and went over to Amazon and got a photographer's screen and I stapled it to it. So, that way I could put it out when I needed it. I could put it away. It was as simple as that. It was like a $30, $40 thing that I started with when I started out. And I don't even use my microphone anymore. I hate it.
You know what? Actually, that brings up a good point. Some good things happened during 2020. A lot of bad things too, and I don't want to downplay, but some good things. One of which is people realized that they liked seeing people be human, right? People realize they like, and what I mean by that is sometimes just your normal living, like behind you, goes a lot further than having a super polished setup because they feel like, oh, that's like me. I have a picture like that in my room. I have a bookshelf, right? Like people just feel like, okay, this feels human. My background may not, right? So I have like a super minimalist personality. So this like fits me really well. But in general, if you're just in a chair, you're just in your normal office where you hang out, that's starting to go a really long way because people are craving a human element. If they can see it where you are, people really like that. And so I'm all about improving the quality of it, of course, but at the same time, don't lose the human touch and make it something that makes people immediately feel disconnected from you. Like there's no way I could ever have what that person has. So I automatically have this barrier between us now. So for what that's worth as well, I think just being authentic and human, being yourself, being where you are is such a gift for podcasting.
Yeah. Any other questions before we let him go? Before we finish up here?
Yeah, not let me go. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm honored.
No,
It's been a blast.
No more questions? Anybody? I'm going to add one thing before we go too. If you're a little bit afraid to be a guest, take the leap. If you're afraid you're going to fall on your face, take the leap. I can honestly tell you if you go listen to my first podcast as a host, I suck. Like I absolutely suck, but we all do. It's like anything else out there. It takes practice. You may get off an interview and go, oh my gosh, it was horrible. Chances are that audience thought you were great. So don't be harder on yourself than the audience is going to be because you're like the authenticity Alex was talking about. They're looking to connect with you. And especially if you're an author, you have to connect with those readers to get them to read. So you might as well start with the podcasting. Also, don't wait until your book comes out. There's no reason why, before a book comes out, I can't be on Alex's show as the author of the upcoming book and talk about my expertise and not so much the book. If you notice when people do TV interviews, they're introduced that way a lot, and they're not there to talk about their book. They're there to talk about a particular soundbite of an opinion, or I know with the late Leslie Michaels, they called her up and had her on to talk about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial because she had a feminism book. So, look for those opportunities where you can be the upcoming author of, and don't wait until the last minute to get yourself booked.
Just a quick question. Could you say something, Alex, about the cost of PodMatch?
Sure. Yeah. I have to pull that up because I don't know it off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
I think it's $25 a month. I think I looked for somebody yesterday.
Is it? Okay. I am pulling up the pricing page. PodMatch.com/pricing will get you there. So as a guest, $26 a month. There.
Okay.
And then there's a professional membership at $57. I always suggest starting with the standard membership. And then if you do like it, you want to do more, then working your way up to it. But so $26 a month and podmatch.com/pricing will give you that information. Julia, you might actually have like a partner link. If you do, that'll at least ensure you always get the price I just mentioned. Let's put it that way, because it ensures this price. So
I think you get it. I think you get a discount with mine. Is it? I don't even know what it is.
I don't know either. Sorry.
I'll find out.
Well, while you find that, Michelle asked a question, Alex.
Yeah.
She said, you said that Kelly is a good resource for guesting. Do you have any other recommendations?
For other resources about guesting?
I'm assuming that's what she means. Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm going to drop a link here. This is actually, so it is my podcast. I'm not on most of my own episodes. Let's put it that way. But I'll have, if you go to podpros.com/episodes, there is, and I'll put that in the chat real quick. There is right under the cover art of the image, there's like a list of categories. Just click on guesting, and then it'll filter into just guesting, specific podcast episodes. Like actually the second one that you'll see right now is Kelly, who I was just talking about. So you get to see a bit more about her. But some of the others have some just scroll through and read the topics. I do my best to make the title of it what it's actually about. So if you scroll through, you'll be able to find some really good professionals on talking about podcast guesting. So that would be my suggestion. Again, podpros.com/episodes. Click the little guesting filter and it'll show you just those episodes.
Yeah. And I just dropped my, I think I sent it just to Christy. Hold on.
I'm about to say, I didn't see it.
I know. I was chatting with Christy earlier. Here, I put my link in there, and you get best pricing with that. So I think if they're running something, you get a little bit less than the average person on that.
At the very least, it'll ensure that it always stays best price. If you're not doing this today, just save that, because if we not that we are raising prices more, if we do this, we'll still be at whatever the best possible price is. So, and thanks, Juliet, for being a partner. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you would be the only person that hasn't raised their price yet.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? I'll share why. I know we have to go, but just real quick, we didn't want to do that because at some point, like a lot of services in podcasting are raising their prices right now, some of them aggressively, but it's pulling out the independent voices. And I shared that earlier. Like if you start charging guests, eventually hit the point where you're not having any real individuals with a story, with a message to share. And so we made the decision that, you know what, we'll take the hit on it, even though like everything going up on our end, but I'm like, but we want to maintain independent voices being on the platform because that's the message we believe that the world needs, not raising the prices so much that we get the big corporations and stuff like that. So we made the decision to keep the price low. And as a matter of fact, I've talked to some of the bigger corporations that were considering us, and they said, your pricing's too low. If you want us to do it, you need to charge more so we can take it seriously. And we decided that's another win for us. We're not going to earn them as clients. It's just not going to happen, but we'll keep the authentic, independent voices. And that is why we started the company. It's always going to be why we do this. So for us, yes, we may at some point have to raise prices, which I really don't want to have happen. But for now, we're going to keep it how it is. And that, again, that's like the heart and soul of what we do here.
Yeah. And that's great, you guys. I don't know how many of you listen to podcasts. That's what I listen to all day. I don't watch mainstream media anymore. It's all... I don't know if you know this, I'm probably off topic, but Obama signed a bill in 2013 that allowed the news media to feed us propaganda, and they do on a regular basis. So alternative media is really becoming a strong resource, whether it's you want to learn how-to, you want to know what's going on in the world, whatever you want, you can find a podcaster who is podcasting on that topic out there. So, Alex, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on today. But that's right. We have to do, what are these, jazz hands?
Oh, I love this.
I just clap in your ears. It's no big deal.
It's silent. It's muted real hand clapping.
Oh, I love it. Y'all are so kind. What a blast. This was so much fun to be here. I really appreciate y'all for being here, for having me, for engaging. This was really fun today. Thank you.